The sun was just beginning to dip behind the trees, painting the small town streets in shades of gold and gray. The sidewalks were quiet except for the sound of sneakers brushing against the pavement. A teenage boy named Derek walked alone, his gym bag hanging loosely from his shoulder. He had just finished basketball practice and was tired but happy. The cool air felt good against his skin. He put in his earbuds and let the music fill his head while he thought about dinner waiting at home and the game his team had played earlier that day. He wasn't thinking about anything serious, just normal teenage thoughts when a slow car rolled up beside him. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the black and white colors of a police cruiser. He looked forward, hoping they would just drive past. But the car didn't move on. It matched his pace for a few seconds before stopping completely. Derek pulled one earbud out, unsure what was happening. A voice came from the car window. "Hey, you there. Come here for a second." Derek turned, confused. One of the officers inside, a man with a trimmed mustache and sharp eyes, motioned for him to stop. The other officer, younger but more serious-looking, was already stepping out of the car. Derek froze where he was. "Is something wrong?" he asked carefully. "You fit the description of someone we're looking for," the older officer said. "Mind telling us where you're headed?" Derek pointed down the street. "I'm just going home. I live a few blocks that way." "I just came from basketball practice." "A basketball practice, huh?" The younger officer's tone was skeptical. He looked Derek up and down as if studying every detail of his hoodie, gym shorts, and backpack. "You got some ID on you?" Derek nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." "It's in my bag. Keep your hands where I can see them," the officer said immediately. "Don't reach in there just yet." Derek's heart began to pound. He didn't understand what was happening. He'd seen stories like this on the news, but he never thought it would happen to him. He tried to stay calm, remembering what his mother always told him about being respectful and keeping his voice steady if he ever dealt with police. "Okay," he said softly, keeping his hands visible. The older officer got out of the car now, too. "We've had reports of a young man breaking into homes around here. You match the description. Black male, dark hoodie, about your age." Derek felt a wave of fear rush through him. He had lived in this neighborhood most of his life. He knew almost everyone here. "Sir, I promise I didn't do anything. You can call my mom if you want. She can tell you who I am." "Where does she work?" the younger officer asked, his tone more like an accusation than a question. "She works for the government," Derek said honestly, though his voice shook a little. "Please, I can call her right now." The older officer frowned. "We'll handle this. Just keep your hands where we can see them." People were starting to notice now. A woman across the street peeked out from behind her curtains. A man walking his dog slowed down, watching the scene carefully. Derek felt his face burn with embarrassment. He wasn't doing anything wrong, yet here he was, being questioned like a criminal in his own neighborhood. The younger officer stepped closer. "Go ahead and turn around," he said. "We just need to make sure you're not carrying anything you shouldn't." "Wait," Derek said quickly, panic rising in his chest. "I didn't do anything. I'm just trying to get home." "Please, don't move," the officer barked. His hand rested on the edge of his holster, and that sight alone made Derek freeze. He could barely breathe. Every second felt heavy, like the air itself was pressing down on him. His phone buzzed in his pocket, his mom calling, probably wondering why he was late. He wanted so badly to answer it, to tell her what was happening, but he was too scared to move. "Phone ringing?" the older officer asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes, sir. It's my mom." "She's probably worried," Derek said. The officer sighed and looked at his partner. "Just keep your hands up until we figure this out." The younger one took a step forward. "What's your last name again?" "Williams," Derek said quietly. "Derek Williams." "All right, Derek," the officer said, still cautious. "What's in the bag?" "My gym clothes, shoes, water bottle," Derek said. "You can look if you want." "Step back," the officer ordered. Derek obeyed, moving slowly. The officer crouched down, unzipped the bag, and pulled out a basketball, a pair of sneakers, and a crumpled towel. No weapons, no stolen property, just what any high school kid might carry after practice. The older officer's expression softened slightly, but he didn't apologize. "You can put your hands down," he said. "But you need to be careful walking around like that." "Like what?" Derek asked before he could stop himself. "Like that, hoodie up, hands in your pockets, looking nervous." The officer replied as if it were obvious. Derek bit his lip, trying not to show anger. "I was just cold," he said quietly. The younger officer looked around and saw more neighbors watching. A few even had their phones out, recording. He muttered something under his breath and looked uncomfortable now that attention was turning on them. Meanwhile, Derek's phone was still ringing in the street where he dropped it. The screen showed his mother's contact photo and the word Mom flashing again and again. When the officers didn't notice, he bent slightly to pick it up. "Hey, I said, don't move," the younger officer snapped, stepping forward again. "I was just getting my phone," Derek said quickly, his voice cracking. The older one put a hand out to calm his partner. "It's fine. Let's not make a big scene." But it already was a scene. Cars passing by slowed down to see what was happening. A few people whispered to each other, shaking their heads. Derek felt small, powerless, and exposed. His phone buzzed again, but this time the call didn't stop. His mom's voice filled the air from the speaker. "Derek? Derek, where are you?" she said, her voice tight with concern. The older officer frowned. "Put that on speaker," he said. Derek hesitated. "She's really worried. Can I please tell her I'm okay?" The officer nodded reluctantly. "Go ahead." "Mom," Derek said, his voice shaking. "I'm okay, I'm just—" He looked at the officers, unsure what to say next. "I'm talking to the police." There was a pause on the other end. "The police?" Her voice repeated, calm but sharp now. "Where are you exactly?" "Near Maple Street," Derek said. "By the park." There was no response for a second. Then his mother said, "Stay where you are. Don't move. I'm coming." The call ended. The officers exchanged looks. "You didn't need to call her," the younger one muttered. "We were just checking." Derek said nothing. He stared down at the ground, the music still playing softly through one earbud that had slipped out earlier. His heart wouldn't slow down. Only a few minutes passed before the sound of an engine grew louder. A dark SUV turned the corner fast and stopped right behind the police car. The door swung open and a woman in a professional suit stepped out. She moved with confidence, her eyes sharp and focused. The officers turned, surprised. She walked straight toward them. "Is there a problem here?" she asked firmly, her voice calm but commanding. The older officer stepped forward. "Ma'am, we were just—" Before he could finish, she held up a badge. The small gold emblem glinted in the fading sunlight. "Special Agent Williams, FBI," she said evenly. "And that's my son." The air went still. Both officers froze in place, their expressions shifting instantly from authority to unease. People nearby whispered, realizing who she was. The younger officer's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Agent Williams looked at her son, then back at the officers. "What exactly did he do to justify this stop?" The older one stammered. We thought he matched the description of a suspect. It was just a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" She repeated, her tone icy but controlled. "My son was walking home from practice." "You drew suspicion because of his skin color and a hoodie." "No, ma'am, it's not like that." "It's exactly like that," she said quietly. "And you both know it." The street was silent now except for the hum of passing cars. Derek's mother put a hand on his shoulder. He could feel how tense she was, but she never raised her voice. She didn't have to. Her presence alone said everything. The officers stepped back awkwardly, muttering apologies that didn't sound convincing. She listened but didn't respond. Instead, she turned to her son. "Let's go home." As they walked away, Derek looked back once more. The officers stood beside their car, faces red, the weight of their mistake sinking in. He didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time that evening, he could breathe again. When they reached the SUV, his mom unlocked the door and waited until he was inside. Then she took a deep breath before getting in herself. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The quiet felt heavy but safe. Finally, she said softly, "You did everything right." Derek nodded, his throat tight. "I was scared," he whispered. "I know," she said. "So was I." They drove off down the street as the last bit of sunlight faded, leaving behind a quiet neighborhood that had just witnessed something it wouldn't soon forget. The car was quiet for most of the ride home. Derek stared out the window, watching the streetlights blur into streaks of white and orange. His hands were still trembling a little, though he tried to hide it. His mother noticed, of course. She noticed everything. She kept one hand on the steering wheel, the other resting loosely in her lap, her jaw tight but her eyes calm. When they reached their driveway, she parked but didn't get out right away. Derek could tell she was trying to collect her thoughts before speaking. Finally, she turned to him and said, "You did nothing wrong tonight. Do you understand that?" He nodded slowly, though his voice was barely above a whisper when he said, "Yeah." She studied his face for a moment longer, then sighed softly. "Go inside. I'll be there in a minute." Derek stepped out of the car and walked toward the house. The porch light was on, casting a soft glow across the front steps. He unlocked the door and went straight to the living room, dropping his gym bag near the couch. The house felt quiet, too quiet. He sat down and stared at the floor, replaying the whole thing over in his head. The flashing lights, the yelling, the way his heart had raced so fast he thought it might burst. He could still see the look on the younger officer's face when he reached for his phone, that look of fear and suspicion mixed together. It made him feel small, like no matter what he said or did, it wouldn't matter. A few minutes later, his mom came in. She'd taken off her jacket and badge, but still carried herself with that same steady confidence she always had. She sat across from him and said quietly, "I called the station." He looked up at her, unsure what to say. "I wanted to know what report they were following, who gave the description, and why they thought you fit it," she continued. "They're looking into it now." Derek hesitated. "Are they in trouble?" She looked at him for a moment before answering. "Maybe, but this isn't about revenge. It's about accountability." He nodded again, though he didn't really know what that meant in this moment. All he could think about was how scared he'd been. "I thought something bad was going to happen," he said softly. "I didn't even do anything." His mother reached out and took his hand. "I know, baby. I know." They sat there quietly for a long time. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen was the only sound in the house. Outside, the neighborhood was peaceful again, as if nothing had happened. But inside Derek's mind, everything still felt shaken. Later that night, he went to his room and lay on the bed staring at the ceiling. He tried listening to music to calm himself down, but every sound, the creak of the floor, a car passing outside, made his chest tighten a little. He finally fell asleep around midnight, though it was a restless kind of sleep filled with half-formed dreams. The next morning, he woke up to the smell of coffee and toast. His mom was already dressed, sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open. She looked serious but not angry. When he sat down, she smiled faintly. "How are you feeling?" "Tired," he said honestly. She nodded. "I figured. I have to head into the office today, but I want you to take it easy. Stay home, okay?" He agreed, though he didn't really feel like doing anything anyway. Before leaving, she came over and hugged him tight. "Don't let last night define how you see yourself," she whispered. "You're more than what they saw." After she left, Derek sat on the couch scrolling through his phone. It didn't take long before he saw the videos. Someone from the neighborhood had uploaded the entire incident to social media. The clip was already spreading fast. The title said something like, "Teen stopped by police, saved by FBI mom." His stomach twisted as he watched it. There he was, standing on the sidewalk looking scared and confused, surrounded by 2 officers. The comments below were a mix of support and anger. Some people called it racial profiling. Others said the officers were just doing their job. He didn't know how to feel. Part of him wanted to shut it all off, but another part of him kept watching, unable to look away. The video wasn't long, but it captured everything, the tone, the fear, the moment his mom showed up. Seeing it from the outside made it even more real. The doorbell rang, snapping him out of his thoughts. He opened it to find his neighbor, Mr. Coleman, standing there. The older man held up his phone. "You saw the video yet?" Derek nodded. Mr. Coleman shook his head slowly. "I'm glad your mama showed up when she did. Things could have gone a lot worse." "Yeah," Derek said quietly. "I know." "You did good, son," the man said kindly. "You stayed calm. That ain't easy." Derek thanked him, and after he left, he closed the door and leaned against it. Everyone was talking about what happened, but nobody really knew what it felt like inside his chest. That was something he couldn't explain. Later that afternoon, his mom called from work. "You holding up okay?" She asked. "I'm fine," he said. "It's just weird seeing it online." "I figured that might happen," she said. "Listen, the department called me back. The chief wants to meet. He said he'd like to speak with both of us if you're comfortable with that." Derek hesitated. "Do I have to?" "No," she said gently. "Only if you want to. But sometimes facing something directly helps you take back your power." He thought about that for a while. "Okay," he finally said. "I'll go." The meeting was set for the next day. When they arrived at the police station, Derek's palms were sweaty and his stomach felt heavy. The same building that once made him nervous now felt even more intimidating. His mother walked beside him, calm as ever. Inside, they were greeted by the police chief, a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes. He invited them into his office and offered them seats. "First, let me say I'm sorry," he began. "What happened shouldn't have happened. We've reviewed the footage, and while the officers didn't use force, they acted on poor judgment." Derek stayed quiet, watching him carefully. The chief continued. "We'll be providing additional training for all officers. I've already spoken to the two who stopped you. They understand the mistake they made." His mother spoke next, her tone firm but respectful. "Chief, I appreciate the acknowledgement, but you and I both know training isn't enough if the mindset doesn't change. My son shouldn't have to justify his presence in his own neighborhood." The chief nodded. "You're right. We're working to rebuild trust. I'd like to invite you both to speak at our community forum next week. Share your perspective." Derek glanced at his mom, unsure. He wasn't used to being the center of attention. But she looked at him with a reassuring smile. "We'll think about it," she said. After the meeting, they walked out into the sunlight. Derek took a deep breath, feeling a bit lighter than before. "Do you really want to speak at that thing?" he asked. She shrugged. "Maybe, but only if you do too." He thought about it. Maybe it was time to say something. Not just for himself, but for everyone who felt the same fear he did that night. That evening, he helped his mom cook dinner. They didn't talk much about what happened, but there was an unspoken peace between them. He was beginning to realize that the story wasn't just about fear. It was also about strength. A few days later, when they went to the forum, the room was packed. Reporters, community members, police officers, and local students all filled the chairs. When Derek stepped up to the microphone, his voice shook at first, but then it steadied. "I never thought something like that would happen to me," he began. "I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was just walking home. But that night taught me something. It showed me how quickly things can change and how important it is to stay calm even when you're scared." The room was silent. He took a breath and continued. "I also learned that sometimes people judge you before they even know your name. But I don't want to live angry. I just want to live free, like any kid should." When he finished, the crowd clapped softly at first, then louder. His mom put a hand on his shoulder, proud and calm. After the event, a few officers approached them, including the two who had stopped him that night. They looked nervous. One of them said quietly, "We're sorry, son. We really are." Derek looked at them for a long moment. "I forgive you," he said finally. "Just try not to do that to someone else." They nodded, grateful. As they walked out of the building, Derek felt something shift inside him. The fear that had followed him for days was finally beginning to fade. He wasn't just the kid who got stopped anymore. He was the kid who stood up, who spoke out, who made people see. When they reached the car, his mom smiled and said softly, "That's how change starts." And as the night settled around them, Derek realized she was right. Change didn't come from anger or fear. It came from courage, from speaking the truth and from standing tall, even when the world tried to make you feel small. The days after the community forum felt different for Derek and his mother. The tension that once filled their home had started to fade, replaced by something quieter and stronger. People in the neighborhood now greeted them with warmth and respect. Some even stopped to say how proud they were of how Derek had handled everything. But with that attention came something else too. Curiosity, questions, and a lot of eyes watching. Everywhere he went, it felt like someone recognized him. At the grocery store, at the park, even when he was walking home from school, people would whisper, "That's the boy from the video." At first, it made him uncomfortable. He didn't want to be known just for that night. He wanted to be known for his game-winning shots on the court or the jokes he cracked with his friends, not for being the kid who got stopped by the police. One afternoon, after basketball practice, his coach called him over. "You holding up okay, son?" the coach asked. "Yeah," Derek said. "I'm good," the coach nodded slowly. "You've been through a lot. Don't let it change who you are, but don't forget it either." Derek didn't really know how to respond, but the coach's words stayed with him. At home, his mom was busier than usual. She had been invited to several community meetings and school events to talk about equality and understanding. Sometimes Derek went with her, sitting quietly in the back while she spoke. He was amazed every time she stood in front of a room full of people, strong, steady, never raising her voice, yet somehow commanding everyone's full attention. One evening, she came home later than usual, still wearing her work clothes. Derek was on the couch doing homework when she sat down beside him. "How was practice?" she asked. "It was fine," he said. "Coach said we might get new uniforms soon." She smiled. "That's good news." There was a pause before she added, "The department reached out again. They're starting a mentorship program for young people. They want to involve kids from different backgrounds, and they asked if you'd like to be part of it." Derek looked up, surprised. "Me? Why?" "Because they see how you handled everything," she said softly. "They want your perspective." He thought about it. Part of him wanted to say no. He didn't really want to spend time with police officers again. But another part of him remembered what his mom always said about change. It starts small, with conversations, with being brave enough to show up. "I'll think about it," he said. She nodded. "That's all I ask." A week later, he decided to give it a try. The mentorship meeting was held at the community center. When Derek walked in, he saw about 20 people there, some teens like him, a few community leaders, and several officers in uniform. For a second, he hesitated at the door, feeling the old nervousness creeping back. But then one of the organizers, a kind older woman, smiled and waved him over. "Glad you could make it," she said. "Come, sit anywhere you like." The meeting started with introductions. When it was Derek's turn, a few people recognized his name. The room went quiet for a moment, but he spoke calmly. "I'm here because I want to understand," he said. "And I want things to get better. For everyone." As the sessions went on, something unexpected happened. Derek started talking with the officers, not as enemies, but as people. One of them, Officer Bennett, shared stories about his early days on the force, about the mistakes he made and what he learned. He admitted he still had more to learn. "I've got 2 kids about your age," the officer said one day after a meeting. "What happened to you made me rethink a lot of things. I'm not proud that it took something like that to open my eyes." Derek didn't really know what to say. He just nodded and said quietly, "I appreciate you saying that." Over time, those meetings turned into conversations, real ones. Some were hard, some were uncomfortable, but they were honest. Derek began to see that not everyone in uniform was the same. There were people who genuinely wanted to make things better, and that gave him hope. One night, after another long session, Derek and his mom sat on the porch. The sky was clear and a cool breeze blew through the trees. "You're proud of yourself, aren't you?" she asked gently. He shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe a little. It just feels weird, like everything that happened. Maybe it's helping somehow." His mom smiled, looking out into the night. "That's the power of turning pain into purpose. Not everyone can do that." He thought about her words for a while. Maybe she was right. At school, things were changing too. His friends started asking more questions, not just about what happened, but about how he felt. He realized that people really did want to understand. They just didn't always know how to ask. He tried to be patient with them. One day during lunch, a classmate he barely knew came up and said, "Hey, my dad's a police officer." He saw the video. He said, "Your mom handled it like a pro." Derek smiled faintly. "Yeah, she's good at that." "She is," the boy said. He said she reminded him why he joined the force in the first place, to protect, not to profile. Derek nodded. That small comment meant more than he expected. Later that week, his mom was invited to speak at a police academy event, and she asked Derek to come along again. This time, instead of sitting quietly in the back, he stood beside her. When she finished her speech, the moderator turned to him and said, "Would you like to share anything?" He hesitated for a second, then stepped up to the microphone. "That night changed a lot of things for me," he began. "I used to think the police and people like me would always be on opposite sides. But I've met officers who are trying to do better. And I've learned that we all have to keep trying even when it's uncomfortable." The room was silent. Every eye was on him, but for once he wasn't nervous. He spoke from the heart. "I don't want to be remembered as the kid who got stopped for no reason. I want to be remembered as someone who helped start a conversation." When he stepped back, people began to clap, slowly at first, then louder. His mother smiled proudly. Afterward, a few officers came up to thank him. Some shared that they had sons around his age, and that hearing his story made them realize how deeply fear and misunderstanding can affect young people. That night, on the way home, his mom said, You're making more of a difference than you realize. He looked at her, thoughtful. I didn't do anything special. She shook her head. You spoke with honesty. That's rare. Sometimes that's the most powerful thing anyone can do. Over the next few months, things settled into a new kind of normal. The video that had once been the center of attention slowly faded from people's feeds, but its message lingered. It had sparked discussions at schools, in churches, and even in local government meetings. Derek's story became a quiet reminder that one small encounter can open big conversations. At home, life felt steady again. Derek focused on school and basketball, spending weekends helping out at the mentorship program. His mom kept working on community outreach, sometimes traveling to other cities to speak. They still talked about that night every now and then, not with anger, but with understanding. One evening, as they were cleaning up after dinner, his mom looked at him and said, You know, when I got that call from your phone that night, I was terrified. Derek stopped what he was doing and looked up. I know, he said quietly. She smiled softly. But when I got there and saw you standing strong even when you were scared, I realized you had grown into someone brave. You reminded me that courage isn't about having no fear. It's about standing tall in spite of it. He felt a lump in his throat. I learned that from you, he said. They both laughed quietly, and for the first time in a while, there was no shadow hanging over their home, just peace. As months passed, the story that had once been painful began to feel like part of something bigger. Derek didn't forget what happened, but he didn't carry the same weight anymore. He knew now that what started as a moment of fear had turned into a journey of strength and change. And even though the world outside was still far from perfect, he believed that every conversation, every moment of honesty, could bring it a little closer. That belief stayed with him. Every time he walked home at sunset, past the same streets where it all began, he felt something new, a quiet kind of confidence. He no longer feared the flashing lights or the passing cars. Instead, he felt seen, not as a suspect, but as someone who stood up, spoke out, and helped make things just a little bit better. And that, to him, was enough. A black SUV rolled up fast, its tires crunching the gravel as it stopped near the flashing police lights. The officers turned their heads, a bit startled, their hands still hovering close to their belts. From the SUV's driver's side, a woman stepped out. She was calm, but her eyes were sharp, and her every movement carried quiet authority. She didn't shout, didn't run, but there was something about the way she stood that made everyone pause. The two officers, who just moments earlier had been barking orders at the teen, suddenly fell silent. The woman walked toward them, showing no fear. Her coat shifted slightly as she reached into her pocket, and for a second the officers tensed again, but then she held up a badge. A golden glint caught the sunlight. Federal Bureau of Investigation, she said firmly. Special Agent Williams. The air seemed to freeze. Jaden, still standing with his hands up, blinked in disbelief. His mom had always been composed and patient at home, but seeing her like this, powerful, commanding, was something new. He could barely process what was happening. Moments ago he'd felt helpless. Now the balance had shifted entirely. The older officer, who had been the one giving most of the orders, cleared his throat and took a cautious step forward. Ma'am, this is a misunderstanding, he said quickly. His tone was suddenly softer, almost apologetic. A misunderstanding? Agent Williams repeated, her voice calm but cutting. My son is standing here surrounded by two armed officers. He's been searched, humiliated, and accused of something he didn't do. What part of that sounds like a misunderstanding to you? The younger officer looked down, his confidence draining away. The few neighbors who had been recording the scene now held their phones higher, realizing something significant was unfolding. Jaden lowered his hands slowly, but his mother motioned for him to stay still for a moment. Don't move yet, she said quietly, not taking her eyes off the officers. Let's make sure they understand what they've done, the older officer stammered. We received a call about a possible suspect in the area. Your son matched the description, she interrupted. Yes, I'm sure he did. Can you describe this suspect to me? The officer hesitated. A young black male, about 6 feet tall, wearing a hoodie. Agent Williams folded her arms. That could describe half the kids coming home from basketball practice today. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Jaden could hear his own heartbeat. His mom's voice was steady, but he could tell she was holding back her anger. She wasn't just protecting him. She was making sure these officers remembered this moment. "I'm not here to argue," she continued, "but I will hold you accountable. You drew on an unarmed minor. You detained him without cause. And you threatened him when he tried to call me, his mother. You will explain yourselves properly." The younger officer shifted nervously. "We didn't." "You did," she said sharply. "Your body cameras will show exactly how this happened. I suggest you think carefully about what you say next." The neighbors whispered among themselves. One of them stepped closer and said, "We have it all on video too." The officers exchanged a quick look. The younger one seemed embarrassed, almost regretful. The older one tried to maintain some authority, but it was clear he'd lost control of the situation. Jaden finally spoke, his voice quiet but steady. "Mom, can we go?" "Not yet," she said, her tone softening just a bit as she turned to look at him. "I just need to make sure this doesn't happen to another kid." The sergeant from the local precinct soon arrived, having been called to the scene after hearing a possible officer confrontation. When he stepped out of his car and saw who was there, his eyes widened. "Agent Williams," he said, immediately recognizing her. He'd seen her before during a joint task force meeting. "Ma'am, I didn't realize—" "You shouldn't have to realize who I am," she replied. "You should realize what's right." The sergeant's face turned red. He looked at the two officers who now stood stiffly beside their cruiser. "You two, step back, now." Jaden watched as his mother explained everything, calm and professional, while the sergeant took notes. She didn't raise her voice once. Every word she spoke hit harder because of how controlled she was. It was a kind of power that didn't need shouting, just truth. After a few minutes, she turned back to her son. "Go sit in the car, honey." He hesitated, still a little shaken. "Are you sure?" "Yes," she said softly. "You're safe now." As he walked toward her SUV, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a mix of relief and disbelief. From the car, he could see his mother still standing near the officers, her hands on her hips as she spoke with quiet intensity. Inside the SUV, Jaden stared out the window. He could see one of the officers rubbing his forehead, clearly realizing how wrong things had gone. The neighbors had started to disperse, but a few stayed, watching silently. Jaden knew they would talk about this moment for days, maybe weeks. After what felt like forever, his mother returned and got into the driver's seat. She took a deep breath before starting the engine. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of the car filled the quiet space between them. Finally, Jaden said, "I thought I did everything right. I didn't talk back. I didn't move fast. I did everything you told me to do." She looked at him, her expression softening. "You did, sweetheart. This wasn't your fault." "Then why did it happen?" he asked quietly. She sighed. "Because some people still see skin color before they see a person, but today they saw both. And they saw they were wrong." Jaden nodded slowly, though it didn't make it any easier to understand. "I thought I was going to get arrested for nothing." Her eyes glistened, but she blinked back the emotion. "You don't deserve that fear. No child does." They drove in silence for a while. The sun had started to set, casting a soft orange glow across the quiet streets. Finally, she said, "You know, what matters most is how we handle moments like this. Anger can destroy, but truth can expose. I made sure they'll have to face the truth." Jaden looked out the window again, watching the houses pass by. "You were amazing back there," he said quietly. She smiled faintly. "I wasn't amazing. I was your mother." When they got home, the world seemed to move slower. The normal hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the wall clock. Everything felt heavier, more meaningful. Jaden dropped his bag by the door and sat on the couch, still trying to process it all. His mother made some tea and sat beside him. For a while, they just sat in silence. Then she said, "I've spent my career protecting people's rights, but today reminded me why I started doing it in the first place." He turned to her. "Because of people like me?" She nodded. Because of kids who deserve to walk home without fear. You did nothing wrong, and now those officers know that. I didn't need to yell. I just needed them to see the truth for what it was. That night, she called her supervisor and filed an official report. She didn't demand punishment. She requested retraining for the officers and for the department to review their bias procedures. They need to learn, she said quietly. Change doesn't come from fear. It comes from facing mistakes. Jaden listened from the hallway. Hearing her speak so calmly about the same people who had scared him hours earlier made him realize just how strong she really was. Before bed, she came into his room and said, "I'm proud of you. You stayed calm when you were terrified. That's strength." He smiled faintly. "I just thought about what you'd say if you were there." She reached out and squeezed his hand. "Next time, you won't have to wonder, because everyone there tonight saw who you are. Not just my son, but a young man who stood tall even when others tried to bring him down." Jaden lay awake for a long time after she left the room. The memory of flashing lights still flickered in his mind, but now there was something else, pride, not just in his mother, but in himself. He had faced something unfair, something that could have gone much worse, and he had made it through. Outside, the night was quiet. Inside, the house felt safe again. And though Jaden knew the world wouldn't change overnight, he also knew that what his mother had done, standing her ground, demanding respect, and turning fear into strength, would ripple far beyond their street. Somewhere out there, maybe another officer would think twice. Maybe another mother wouldn't have to rush to a scene like that. And maybe, just maybe, the world would inch a little closer to fairness. The weeks after the incident passed in a blur of attention and quiet reflection. Derek and his mother had returned to their usual routines, but the events of that night and the days following lingered like a shadow that wouldn't fully fade. The story of what happened had spread beyond the neighborhood. Clips of the encounter were shared online, local news stations reported on it, and even a few national outlets highlighted the courage of a mother stepping in to protect her child. Derek found it strange to see himself in the middle of something so public. At first, the attention made him uneasy. Every time he walked down the street or went to school, he could feel eyes on him. Some were curious, some judgmental, and some sympathetic. He tried not to let it bother him, but it was hard. At the same time, he realized that the story gave him a voice, a way to share what it felt like to be young, black, and suddenly the target of fear and misunderstanding. His mother continued her work as an FBI agent, but now her days were also filled with speaking at community events, mentoring programs, and school assemblies. She invited Derek along sometimes, not because he had to be there, but because she wanted him to see how the story could be turned into a lesson for others. At first, he was hesitant, feeling shy about speaking in front of large groups. But slowly he began to see the impact of telling the truth about his experience. One morning, Derek sat in the living room with his mom while she prepared for a community outreach meeting. The sunlight streamed through the windows, highlighting the quiet determination on her face. "Are you ready to share your story today?" she asked gently. "I guess," he said, twisting his hands nervously. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to know everything," she said. "Just tell them what you felt. That's all anyone really needs to hear." When they arrived at the community center, the room was already filled with people. Students, parents, local officers, and volunteers. Derek felt a familiar tension in his chest, but he noticed how the officers in the room looked at him differently now. They weren't judgmental. They were listening. When his mother introduced him, she said, "This is my son. He went through an experience no one should have to face, and he learned something important: how to stay calm and stand tall even when fear feels overwhelming." Derek walked to the microphone, his hands shaking at first. He took a deep breath and began. "I want to talk about what it feels like when people make assumptions about you just because of the color of your skin. That night I was stopped for nothing. I didn't do anything wrong. I was scared and I didn't know if it would end badly." He paused, glancing at his mom for support. She nodded encouragingly. "But then my mom came," he continued. "She reminded me that I wasn't alone, and that even when things feel unfair, we can stand our ground with truth and calmness."